Sometimes the loudest arenas become the quietest classrooms. Amid the roar of the crowd and the chaos of combat, a young man watched something that shook his heart. Not the punches, not the victories, but the peace that followed. He saw fighters who, before stepping into the cage, bowed their heads to the ground and whispered the name of their Lord. He watched them win and lose with the same calm spirit, and something inside him asked, what gives them that peace? He never expected that his path to Islam would begin inside an MMA octagon. He admired strength, discipline, and power, but what he saw in these Muslim fighters went beyond that. They were fierce in the ring, but humble outside it. They fought with skill, but carried serenity in their eyes. He couldn't understand how someone could face such intensity, then step aside, raise their hands, and thank Allah with such sincerity. It was the contrast that intrigued him, the way their strength did not lead to arrogance, but to gratitude. The world told him that power comes from domination, from being the best, from never losing. But these men showed him a different truth, that true power is not about conquering others, but conquering yourself. The more he watched, the more he realized that their strength wasn't only physical, it was spiritual. They were disciplined, not only in body, but in soul. Every training session, every fight, every sujud was an act of devotion. It made him question what he was really fighting for in life. He had been chasing achievements, adrenaline, and approval, but still felt empty. What he saw in them was not just talent, it was peace. Peace that came from knowing who they fought for and who they returned to after every victory and defeat. He began learning more about what made these fighters so different, and what he discovered changed his entire perception of strength. He found that Islam didn't glorify the ego, it humbled it. It didn't teach domination, it taught discipline. It didn't praise aggression, it praised control. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, "The strong man is not the one who can overpower others, the one who controls himself when angry." That one statement struck him harder than any punch could. It was then that he realized what he had been missing all along, control over his inner battles. He began to see that life itself is an arena where we are constantly tested by temptation, by pride, by hardship, and the true champions are those who remain steadfast in faith. The courage he admired in those fighters was not only the courage to fight others, but to fight their own desires, their own fears, and their own weaknesses. That realization was his turning point. He understood that Islam trains the heart just like fighting trains the body, with consistency, endurance, and humility. As he learned about Islam, he found beauty in its structure, its balance, and its purpose. Prayer, fasting, charity, all were forms of training for the soul. Each act of worship was like a round in the ring, building spiritual endurance, patience, and self-mastery. He discovered that Islam was not just about rituals. It was about becoming the best version of yourself, both inwardly and outwardly. And just like the fighters he admired, he learned that faith requires discipline. You can't just claim belief, you must live it, embody it, and practice it daily. Every sujud reminded him that no matter how powerful one appears, true honor is in humility before the Creator. Every act of worship trained him to be calm in chaos, to stay centered in a world full of noise, and to find peace even when life hits hard. He realized that the discipline of the fighters he admired came from their devotion, their unwavering trust in Allah, and their understanding that every battle begins and ends with Him. His journey taught him something profound, that Islam doesn't take away your strength, it refines it. It doesn't suppress your passion, it purifies it. It doesn't make you weak, it gives your strength meaning. The more he practiced his faith, the more he understood that being a Muslim means being a warrior of the soul. You train not to hurt others, but to heal yourself. You fight not to conquer the world, to conquer your ego. You strive not for fame, but for sincerity. And in that struggle, he found the peace he had been chasing all his life. The same peace he once saw in those fighters' eyes, the peace that comes when you stop fighting against Allah's plan and start surrendering to it. That is the real victory, the ultimate triumph, the kind that no crowd can cheer for, but every heart can feel. In the end, his conversion story became a symbol of how Allah guides through unexpected paths. For some, it's a verse that touches the heart. For others, it's a call to prayer echoing in the night. For him, it was a fight, a moment of raw humanity that revealed divine truth. Because in the arena of life, everyone is fighting something. Some fight fear, some fight loss, some fight their own hearts. But those who turn to Allah discover that the fight was never meant to break them. It was meant to bring them home. He never imagined that the world of mixed martial arts, with its noise, adrenaline, and intensity, would lead him towards something so calm, pure, and divine. The journey began with curiosity as he admired the discipline, focus, and sheer strength of MMA fighters. He was drawn not only to their physical power, but to the emotional control they displayed under pressure. Yet among the countless athletes he watched, there was something different about the Muslim fighters. He noticed how, before every fight, they would lower their heads in prayer, whispering quietly as though speaking to something or someone greater than victory itself. Even after fierce battles, they would bow again in gratitude, not to the crowd or the cameras, but to their creator. There was a serenity about them that confused him. How could people who fought with such ferocity carry such gentleness in their hearts? They were not boastful after victory, nor broken after defeat. Their humility didn't seem forced. It was as if they knew that success and failure came from the same source. As he kept watching, a question began to stir inside him. What is it that gives them this peace, this balance between power and surrender? He had seen many athletes lose themselves to pride, anger, or the pursuit of fame. These men seemed different. They fought with purpose, with a kind of spiritual clarity that transcended the cage. That question began to haunt him, slowly opening his heart to a reality he never knew he was searching for. He started researching, watching interviews, and reading more about Islam, the faith that shaped these fighters' mindset. The more he learned, the more he realized that Islam was not a religion of passivity or oppression. As he had been led to believe, it was a path of balance, strength, and self-control. He discovered that the true meaning of jihad was not about fighting others, but fighting one's own ego and desires. The Prophet Muhammad had said that the strongest person is not the one who overpowers others, but the one who controls himself when angry. That truth hit him harder than any punch could. It redefined everything he thought he knew about strength. It made him reflect on his own life, the battles he had fought within himself, the times he had let anger, fear, or emptiness dictate his choices. He realized that he, too, was fighting every day, but not with fists or gloves, with his heart. And just like those fighters trained their bodies to endure pain, he needed to train his soul to withstand life's tests. He began to see Islam as the ultimate discipline, a spiritual training ground for the heart. Prayer became like practice, a daily moment to align with purpose, to humble himself, to remember that control and peace come only from submission to Allah. Fasting taught him patience and self-restraint. Charity taught him compassion and the art of letting go. Each act of worship was like a round in the ring, preparing him to face life's blows with resilience and faith. What fascinated him most was that these fighters weren't just Muslims when they prayed. They embodied their faith in every action, every breath, every battle. Their character reflected their belief. Their composure in the face of fear reflected their trust in Allah's plan. It wasn't religion as a label. It was religion as a lifestyle, a transformation of the soul. Slowly, he began to feel that same peace growing within him. The more he surrendered, the freer he felt. He realized that submission was not weakness. It was liberation from everything that once controlled him: pride, anxiety, and the endless chase for validation. He saw that real victory was not about winning fights, but about conquering the self. The fighters he once admired for their physical dominance now became symbols of something much deeper: the battle between the soul and the ego, between temporary glory and eternal purpose. As he embraced Islam, his perspective on life shifted entirely. Every challenge became an opportunity to strengthen his faith. Every hardship a test of his patience. Every success a reminder to be grateful. He began to understand why those fighters smiled after pain, why they thanked Allah even in loss, because they saw beyond the ring, beyond the world's applause, into a reality where peace comes from surrender, not control. His heart, once restless and searching, now felt anchored in truth. He had discovered that Islam doesn't take away your strength, it refines it. It doesn't suppress ambition, it gives it direction. It doesn't erase your identity, it elevates it by connecting it to something eternal. He found beauty in knowing that every breath, every struggle, every victory could now be for Allah. That realization transformed him completely. The cage he once saw as a place of violence had become, in his eyes, a metaphor for life itself. A place where you are tested, where you fall and rise, where you fight your inner weaknesses and emerge stronger each time. And in that fight, he finally understood what those Muslim fighters had been teaching all along, not through words, but through example, that the greatest victory is not over another person, over your own self. That realization, born in the chaos of the ring, became the peace that guided him for the rest of his life. It began with the roar of a crowd, the lights flashing, the announcer's voice echoing through the arena, and the clash of two fighters locked in intense combat. For most people, MMA was just entertainment, test of skill, endurance, and physical strength. But for him, something far deeper stirred within. He watched the fighters with fascination, not just their movements, but their demeanor before and after the fight. Among them were men who seemed to carry something invisible, something far greater than technique or fame. Before the bell rang, they would kneel, lower their heads, and whisper silent prayers. After their matches, whether victorious or defeated, they would raise their hands again, not to celebrate, but to thank. The humility in their actions, the calm in their expressions, the way they handled pressure with composure was unlike anything he had seen before. These weren't just athletes. They were warriors of both body and spirit. Their strength didn't seem limited to muscle, it extended into something eternal. He found himself questioning what gave them that peace, that balance between dominance and humility. They weren't boastful, nor did they crumble under loss. There was a serenity that came from a place beyond themselves. He began noticing a pattern. Many of these fighters were Muslim, the same people who trained harder than anyone, who endured pain and exhaustion, somehow radiated gratitude and tranquility. It was paradoxical yet beautiful. How could people who live in a world of violence find peace so effortlessly? That contradiction intrigued him until it consumed him. He started watching interviews and documentaries about these fighters, hearing them speak about faith, about Allah, about relying on something higher than themselves in moments of fear and pain. Their words were not rehearsed or forced. They came from lived truth. They spoke of discipline, not just of the body, but of the heart. They described prayer as their grounding, fasting as their purification, and humility as their weapon against arrogance. For the first time in his life, he saw that true strength was not measured by how hard you can hit, but by how well you can restrain yourself when your soul is being tested. That realization began to shift something deep inside him. He started comparing their inner calm to his own inner chaos. He was successful in many worldly ways. He had achieved things that most people would envy, but inside he felt lost. He was constantly searching for meaning, for validation, for a sense of peace that no achievement could give. He had tried to fill the void with ambition, entertainment, and even relationships, but nothing lasted. Everything seemed to fade once the excitement was gone. Watching those fighters, however, felt different. It was like watching a living embodiment of balance, power without pride, control without arrogance, humility without weakness. He realized that what they had wasn't just confidence, it was faith. And faith, unlike worldly power, couldn't be shaken by defeat or loss. The more he learned about Islam, the more it began to make sense. Islam wasn't a religion of blind obedience or ritual, it was a way of transforming the self. It was about surrendering, not to another human being, but to the Creator. It was about aligning your actions with your soul, letting go of ego, and embracing purpose. He understood now why these fighters could kneel before battle and still stand taller than their fear. Submission didn't make them weak, it made them free. Prayer, fasting, and charity weren't restrictions, they were training for the heart, much like how fighters trained their bodies for endurance. He began to realize that every believer was a fighter in their own way, constantly battling their desires, anger, and doubts. Life, like MMA, was a ring of constant struggle, and victory was not determined by defeating others, but by overcoming yourself. This truth hit him deeply. He saw that Islam was not just faith for the mosque, it was a way to live, a guide for the soul, a spiritual discipline that elevated humanity. And the peace he once only admired from afar began to enter his own heart, slowly, steadily, as he took his first steps toward the faith that had transformed warriors into believers. As he continued learning, his perspective on life began to change completely. The faith he once observed from a distance started becoming the lens through which he saw everything differently. He noticed that Islam wasn't about perfection, it was about direction. It didn't demand that one never falls, but that every fall becomes an opportunity to rise again, stronger and more aware. The discipline of prayer taught him that peace was not found in escape, but in connection. He began praying privately, imitating what he saw in videos and tutorials, not out of ritualistic obligation, but from a sincere longing to feel what those fighters felt, a sense of presence before the one who never leaves. Every prostration felt like surrender, yet it was a surrender that gave him power. In bowing down, he discovered the strength to stand firm in life. The sound of the current softened his heart in a way nothing else ever could. Even before understanding the words fully, he could feel their rhythm calming his restlessness. As if his heart recognized a truth his mind was still learning. It was as if every verse whispered a reminder that everything he lost, every pain he carried, every question he once asked, it all had a purpose. Islam wasn't simply answering his questions, it was transforming his soul. What touched him most was how Islam connected the physical world with the spiritual one, teaching that strength, discipline, and resilience were acts of worship. When rooted in sincerity, he began seeing parallels between training his body and purifying his heart. Both required consistency, patience, and humility. Just as an athlete's success depended on daily effort, so did spiritual growth depend on small, daily acts of devotion. It was no longer about being perfect, it was about being sincere. He realized how much his earlier life had been shaped by ego and comparison. He had always sought approval from peers, from society, from himself. He lived in a world that celebrated winning, dominance, and visibility. Faith introduced him to a new kind of victory, the victory of self-control, the triumph of patience, the quiet success of humility. He began to see how much power there was in silence, in forgiveness, and in choosing kindness over reaction. Islam taught him that true honor doesn't come from proving your worth to people. It comes from fulfilling your duty to God. He remembered how fighters would enter the ring without arrogance and leave it without bitterness, no matter the outcome. That became a metaphor for life itself. You do your best, you fight your battles, but you accept that results belong to Allah. This truth lifted a burden from his chest. He no longer felt the same pressure to control everything. He began trusting in divine timing. When things went wrong, instead of frustration, he found reflection. When things went right, instead of pride, he felt gratitude. That shift changed how he interacted with people too. He became more patient, more compassionate, more aware that everyone was fighting unseen battles. He started understanding that being a Muslim meant living with purpose, not perfection. It meant striving every day, knowing that the struggle itself was sacred. His old measure of success, money, status, attention seemed so small now compared to the quiet joy of contentment. He realized that faith didn't remove struggle, it redefined it. What used to feel like pain now felt like purification. What used to feel like loss now felt like redirection. The day he said his shahada, his declaration of faith, was not filled with noise or ceremony. It was quiet, intimate, and deeply personal. He wasn't converting to join a group. He was returning to something his soul had been searching for all along. He felt tears rise as he said the words, not out of sadness, but out of relief. Relief that the search was finally over. It was as if all the years of emptiness and confusion had been preparing him for this moment of clarity. For the first time, his heart felt anchored. Islam didn't erase his struggles, it gave them meaning. It didn't take away the storms of life, it gave him an umbrella of faith to walk through them. Every prayer, every verse, every act of kindness now carried weight. He began to see that life's greatest purpose was not to be known, but to know the Creator, the Sustainer, the one who guides hearts in their most lost moments. His journey was proof that sometimes Allah uses the most unexpected means. A fight, a video, a fleeting moment to awaken a soul. What began as simple curiosity ended in transformation, reminding him and all who listen to his story that faith often begins not in the loudness of miracles, but in the quiet whisper of the heart recognizing its truth. In his early days of faith, he faced many challenges that tested the sincerity of his heart. The transition from his old lifestyle to a life rooted in Islam was not easy. There were moments of confusion, moments when he doubted himself, and times when he questioned if he could live up to the expectations of this new path. He had been surrounded for years by an environment that glorified materialism, competition, and pride, and now he was trying to cultivate humility, patience, and gratitude. The change was deep and internal, not just external. The prayers, the fasting, the discipline, it all demanded a new version of him. And though it wasn't easy, he began to realize that struggle itself was part of the journey. Every time he stumbled, he reminded himself that falling was not failure, it was training. Just like in the gym, growth came through resistance. The more he practiced patience, the stronger his faith became. He learned that the heart, like a muscle, needs struggle to become stronger. This understanding turned his challenges into opportunities. Every obstacle became a means of drawing closer to Allah. Every difficulty reminded him that faith is not meant to make life easier, but to make one stronger in the face of life's hardships. Slowly, His mindset shifted from asking, "Why is this happening to me?" to "What is this teaching me?" That question alone changed everything. There were also moments of deep loneliness. Friends who once celebrated his success couldn't understand why he had chosen a path that seemed so different from the world's definition of happiness. He lost people who couldn't see what he saw, but in that loneliness, he began to discover a deeper kind of companionship, the one that comes from being known by Allah. He realized that the emptiness he once felt in crowds was now replaced by peace in solitude. Prayer became his refuge. In every sujood, he felt closer to something eternal, something that didn't fade or disappoint. The same discipline he once admired in fighters, consistency, perseverance, endurance, now found its truest form in faith. He understood that faith was a lifelong training ground. Just as athletes push their limits to achieve physical mastery, believers push their souls towards spiritual clarity. He found beauty in the balance between strength and surrender, to be firm in his values, yet soft in his heart, to fight his ego, yet submit his will. The paradox of faith fascinated him. It asked for struggle but promised peace, demanded effort but gifted tranquility. It was no longer about winning or losing in the world's eyes. It was about winning the battle within. That realization gave him a new kind of confidence, one rooted not in pride but in purpose. Over time, he became more aware of how faith transforms one's perception of the world. Once felt random, now felt orchestrated with divine precision. Every delay, every disappointment, every heartbreak seemed to carry a lesson. He remembered watching MMA fighters go through grueling training sessions, breaking their limits daily, and thought about how faith required similar discipline, not of the body, but of the soul. Patience became his new strength training, gratitude his daily conditioning. He understood that just as the body needed nourishment, the heart needed remembrance of Allah. Without it, no matter how successful he appeared, he felt spiritually starved. With it, even simple moments felt sacred. He learned to see Allah's mercy in everything. The sunrise, a stranger's smile, the forgiveness after a mistake. Islam was no longer just a religion to him. It was a lens that made every moment meaningful. He realized that faith wasn't about perfection, but about direction, about constantly turning back to Allah, no matter how many times one strays. Every prayer, every repentance was a reminder that it's never too late to return. And in that return, he found freedom. Freedom from the expectations of people, freedom from the chains of ego, freedom from the illusion that happiness lies anywhere other than with Allah. As he shared his journey with others, he spoke not as someone who had everything figured out, but as someone who had tasted both darkness and light and could tell the difference. His message was simple yet profound. No one is too far gone to find their way back. He reminded people that faith can begin anywhere, in a quiet prayer, a painful loss, even a short video that touches the heart. Allah's guidance is not limited by circumstance. It can reach anyone, anywhere, at any time. He wanted others to understand that the path of faith is not a straight line. It's a constant movement between falling and rising, between despair and hope. What matters is not how perfect you are, but how persistent you are in turning back. His own life had become a living example of that truth, a testimony that guidance often comes when least expected. The man who once sought victory in a ring had now found a greater victory within himself, the victory of peace, surrender, and purpose. His story serves as a reminder that when Allah chooses to guide someone, he opens doors that the heart never even knew existed. And in that divine opening lies the ultimate transformation, a soul finally at rest after a long journey home.